Hello, guys, and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast, where we talk about motivation, experiences, and we explore what the world has to offer. I'm Jared.
I'm Ethan.
And today we have a great episode. We're going to talk about Christmas stuff. This episode's coming out right before Christmas, and so we figured we're in the festive mood. Might as well talk about some cool traditions and some Christmas stories to lighten your heart this holiday season.
Let's do it.
Okay.
You can't climb the ladder of success with your hands in a pocket.
We will not go quietly into the night.
They tell me you're a man with true grit.
I am the one who knocks. Don't ever tell me what I can't do, ever!
That's how winning is done.
All right, everybody, welcome. I really like this time of year.
I do too.
It just seems like everybody this time of year seems like they're a little bit nicer. They're a little bit kinder to each other, more generous and loving, and it just seems there's just something in the air that's good. People seem more thankful during Thanksgiving and Christmas season. So
Definitely.
Today we're going to be talking about some, like Jared said, some of the some of our favorite stories about Christmas, as well as some traditions and things that we like about Christmas itself. Maybe some things that our families have done, some things that we've heard of or seen done that we think are kind of cool. So I want to start off with, I am not a huge gift person.
It's not your love language?
Yeah, my wife has been known to call me a Grinch sometimes. Because
it's better than an Ebenezer Scrooge.
I guess that's true. Yeah. Well, so this is my thing about gifts, right? I mean, lots of people, basically Christmas can mean lots of different things for a lot of different people, but when it comes to giving gifts, I just get stressed out, and because it's like I want to get somebody the perfect thing, and I'm not gonna spend the money to get you something that you don't want.
Well, there's a difference between buying gifts for your wife and buying gifts for a guy.
That is true.
I've bought you several gifts, and I'm like, Ethan would love this shirt, or Ethan would love this. And it's so easy. I just know that, like, oh.
Anything with Rambo on it's going to work.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, this is, of course, Ethan would love this. But, like, when I'm buying for my wife, I also feel the same thing. In fact, that's why my wife does most of the Christmas shopping, even for herself. But it's kind of just like, I don't want to buy the wrong thing or the wrong color. And then it kind of kills the magic of Christmas. She's just like, I'll send you my Amazon list and you just click buy. And I'm like, okay, so she actually does a lot of that. And kind of at the point of our marriage where it's just like, she's okay with that. And like, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. And I think it's just interesting a lot of times too, is that, it's what Caitlin and I have tried to do is do, like experiences to potentially surprise each other instead of like specific things, because if there's something that we like really want, then like we'll just buy it if we can. So the Christmas time we just got into gifts, talking about just right off, but it leads into my story.
Okay,
so that's why I brought that up.
Go
ahead. Christmas can really bring things from religious peace and understanding and love and generosity to for some people, Christmas is maybe more about family and gift giving and different things like that. So what I really wanted to talk about first is one of my favorite Christmas stories. And this Christmas story, everyone's probably heard it several times, but it's called The Gift of the Magi. Yeah. So The Gift of the Magi, basically, and there's several different accounts, but they're all pretty much the same. It was a short story written by the writer O. Henry, who was the pen name of William Sidney Porter. But he wrote this on December 10th, 1905. So it's been several years. But the story tells of a young married couple Jim and his wife, Della Dillingham. And the couple were very poor. They did not have lots. Well, they weren't poor, right? The story said they were very poor, but I go the Dave Ramsey way. Poor is a state of mind. They were
Indeed.
broke. They were broke. They didn't have any money, right? They were broke. They were living in a just a tiny apartment that was was leaking and run down, and
Sounds like my college apartment.
yeah, they really didn't have money to be able to give each other gifts for Christmas. The two most prized possessions that they had was Jim had a gold pocket watch that belonged to his father and then his grandfather before him, and he really treasured that. And Della had beautiful, like knee-length hair. So that was, it was like her pride and joy. Obviously, hair that long would take lots of care and effort. So
It's like $100 in shampoo a month.
I didn't even think about that.
Actually,
but yeah.
the more shampoo, you're not supposed to use that much shampoo. It actually damages your hair. So a lot of women don't shampoo their hair every day.
I don't shampoo my hair every day.
You don't?
Not usually.
I do.
I don't
That's
know.
because
That's off
you
topic.
got luscious locks. Anyway,
All
go
right,
ahead.
that's off topic. So it was Christmas Eve, and Della was kind of running around trying to find out what she was going to get for Jim for Christmas. After paying all the bills, there was only $1.87 left to put towards a Christmas present for Jim. Obviously, she wanted to get him something special. She loved him and she cared about him. She knew how hard that he worked and trying to care for her and the family. So desperate to find him the perfect gift, she went out one cold evening and was going to go to the store and try to find something to buy with her $1.87. So the thing that she wanted to buy him most was a chain for his pocket watch that he cherished so much. But obviously it was way out of her price range. So what she decided to do was she kind of got this inspiration that she could sell her hair, her knee-length hair, to be able to fund the purchase of this gift for Jim. So she went to a barber and she sold her hair, cut her hair, and sold it for $20. And I mean, in that time, this was written in 1905, so that was a decent amount of money. So now she had, almost $22 to her name, and she went to this shop and she bought Jim a platinum chain for his pocket watch. And she ran home just extremely excited, sad, obviously, that her luscious hair was gone, but so excited that she was able to get something special for her husband. So she went home, she started making dinner, putting everything together and wrapped the gift. But when Jim came home for work, he walked in the door and kind of stared at Della and was trying to figure out what's different about you. And obviously he recognized that all of your hair is gone. And she said that she quickly said, I sold my hair to buy you this present. And she went to give this gift to Jim, and Jim pulls out his present and he gives it to her instead and says, here, look at this first. And the package that he gave her was his Christmas present. So she opened it up and she found it was a pair of really expensive combs that could be used for her long, luscious hair. And she immediately started crying because obviously she had cut off all of her hair. So she gives the package to her, the present to Jim, and Jim opens it up and he looks at it and he just kind of like falls back in his chair, because he realizes that she got him a chain for his watch. Well, he sits down on the couch and he looks at her and he says, well, I sold my watch to pay for your combs. So the end of the story, basically, they decide just to put the gifts down and have dinner together and, just spend time with each other. But I really like that story just because of the irony that goes into it. Now, we kind of started talking about gifts, and it might seem at first that the meaning of this story is just to talk about like ironic materialism, but it goes a lot further than that for me. For me, it's not about the gifts at all. It's about the underlying principle behind them. It might seem foolish that she cut her hair off to buy the thing and to buy the chain, and then he sold his prized, watch from his father and grandfather to get the combs. But for me, the underlying story was that they sacrificed something that they loved for each other, for the other person.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice really, to me, is a perfect comparison or reflection upon the Christmas season itself, and basically you can compare it to the birth of Christ and the gifts that were brought to him by the wise men, or it could even be the gift of the gift from the Father of giving us the Son, or the gift of Christ and the many things that He has done for us in our lives that we call them gifts and treasures, but really it goes so much deeper that it's personal sacrifice from one person to another. And that's why I love that Christmas story.
That's a great story. It's so cute between two couples, and I bet they just kind of had a laugh after that. They're just kind of like, man, this is hilarious. Let's go pawn all this and just go.
Yeah, I was like,
get something fun,
Yeah, seriously. Well, she's probably thinking, well, my hair will grow back. It might take several years, but it'll grow back. And then he's probably thinking, oh, but I need to get my watch back.
But you're absolutely right. It's just like they sold their prized possession to get something to sacrifice for that other person. It's just kind of cool that they both. It's like the opposite of the Pina Colada song. You know that song? It's like if you like Pina Coladas.
Oh,
yeah. He is looking in the paper and he sees an ad of someone that's like, if you're not into yoga, if you have a brain, and then he's like, oh yeah, so he goes to the bar to meet this girl, ends up being his wife. And so they were both kind of upset with it and like tired of their marriage, but then they ended up like falling in love again because
I do remember that.
It's like the opposite of that.
Exactly. It's the same opposite.
End of the story is the same though. They both fall in love. They both come together again. But that is a good Christmas story. I've always appreciated that one, and it kind of makes you think about how meaningful is this gift that I'm giving. Yeah,
and gifts don't always have to be material things. They can be time or quality time or service. I think service is a huge thing too that can be gifted. That is a present in and of itself, giving your time to help someone else.
Totally. Yep. Well, I had one story that I've always kind of liked. Many people have heard about it, but I kind of dug into it a little bit deeper and found some cool stuff. It's the story about the peace on Christmas Eve in World War I, where the soldiers came together and did stuff, played soccer and traded stuff. That was a cool story. There's some videos on it on YouTube. There's a song about it, which is really cool. But I just wanted to dig in a little bit more into that and explain kind of more of the details there. The year was 1914, so it was just a little bit into the war. And at this point in the war of maneuver had basically ended, and everybody had started trenching in. And so the trenches in some cases were as close as 50 yards apart. And so you have all these men in these trenches, and they would actually frequently yell over things to each other, like greetings or, hey, how's it going? What's the news? Some of the Germans had actually lived in England, or London particularly, and they were familiar with English, and so they would yell over and say, "Hey, how's the soccer team doing?" And they would ask about football. They would ask about sports leagues. In fact, in some cases, they would talk about the weather, or they would talk about ask the other side to send messages to their sweethearts in London. And so it's crazy that you're so close to someone that you want to kill, but you're having a conversation with them
that you're supposed to kill. Maybe
Yeah.
they didn't particularly want to kill them, but
yeah, that's exactly it. And so the interesting about it's such a strange war. You're just trenched in, and then these guys are 50 yards away, and you can hear everything they're saying and everything they're doing. So in the Christmas of 1914, now this is right towards the beginning of the war. There was roughly 100,000 British and German troops were involved in the informal cessations of hostility along the Western Front. So the Western Front was from basically Switzerland all the way up to the sea, basically through France. And the Eastern Front was along kind of where Ukraine is. So the Western Front, it's interesting that it wasn't just like everybody at the same time. In some places they had these treaties, in some places they didn't. And it's pretty cool. There was a lot of accounts from that some of these truces lasted just Christmas Day and night, and some of them continued to New Year's Day. So they're just hanging out with each other and talking and chatting and swapping stuff. And I want to read some of the different accounts here that are just really cool from people that lived through that. One of them was Captain Robert Miles, who was the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, who was attached to the Royal Irish Rifles. And this was in 1914. It was published in a paper. And he said, Friday, Christmas Day, we are having the most extraordinary Christmas Day imaginable. That's pretty cool. A sort of unarranged and quite unauthorized, but perfectly understood and scrupulously observed truce exists between us and our friends in front. The funny thing is, it only seems to exist in parts of the battle line. On our right, left, we can hear them firing away as cheerful as ever. The thing started last night, a bitter cold night with white frost. Soon after dusk, when the Germans started shouting, "Merry Christmas, Englishmen," to us, of course our fellows shouted back, and presently large numbers of both sides had left their trenches unarmed and met in the debatable, shot-riddled no-man's land between the lines. Here the argument, all on their own, came to be made that we should not fire at each other until after midnight tonight. Then we're all fraternizing in the middle. We naturally did not allow them too close to our line and swapped cigarettes and lies in the utmost good fellowship. Not a shot was fired that night. I thought that was kind of cool how he said that they're in the middle of the no man's land. Shots are being fired on, down the way. They can hear cannons and mortars and guns going off, but right there on the line, it was peaceful. Another German, he said, same guy said, of the Germans, they are distinctly bored with the war. And this is just right at the beginning. In fact, one of them wanted to know what on earth we were doing here fighting them. The truce in that sector continued into Boxing Day, which is the day after Christmas. He commented about the Germans, the beggars simply disregarded all our warnings to get down from their parapet, which is the top of the trench. So things are at a deadlock. And he said, we can't shoot them in cold blood. I cannot see how we can get them to return to business. So it's almost like these guys are coming out and just like, we're done. We don't want to fight. We just want to hang out and like tell us about everything and just want to talk and they want to play soccer and they want to trade cards and trade buttons and they're like, okay, get back to business. Go back behind your trench line so we can actually start shooting it because I'm not going to just shoot you when you're standing out here trying to play soccer with me.
Could you just imagine like yelling across to a buddy you just met and a friend? You're just like, hey, put your head down. I can see you. It's just like.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. Some of the other guys who also talked about this. There were some other interesting quotes. This one guy, Bruce Bairnsfather, he said, "I wouldn't have missed that unique and weird Christmas for anything. I spotted a German officer, some sort of lieutenant, I should think, and being a bit of a collector, I intimidated to him and that I had taken a fancy to some of his buttons. He says, I brought out my wire clippers and with a few deft snips removed a couple of his buttons and put them in my pocket. I then gave him 2 of mine in exchange. The last I saw was of one of my machine gunners who was a bit of an amateur hairdresser in civil life, cutting the unnaturally long hair of a docile Balchi, which is from one of the countries, who was patiently kneeling on the ground whilst the automatic clippers crept back up the back of his neck. So these guys are cutting each other's hair. It's wild, man. And so it's just like these guys were out there and they're just like, you know what? We're right here together on the front lines, just mere yards from each other. Another one of the stories here, there's an Englishman who says, he writes his mother and he's like, guess what? I'm hanging out in this trench right now. And he's like, I've got tobacco in my pipe, but guess what? It's German tobacco. And you might think that I pulled this off a dead German, but he said I didn't. I traded it with a live German. It's the best Christmas ever. We're all hanging out. Right now we're doing it. He's like, and he ends it saying, marvelous, isn't it? And so I thought that was such a cool, some cool stories from people that were actually there. And the truce, in some cases, like I said, they went on for a longer time. Obviously, a lot of the military leadership did not like these men were calling these truces. In fact, they said that these types of things should stop. Adolf Hitler, who was a corporal in the 16th Bavarian Reserve Infantry, was against them, against fraternizing with the enemy.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the company commanders who led a short truce to allow each side to go get their dead and bury their dead, he actually was court-martialed. His name was Sir Ian, I'm going to butcher his last name, Clocoon, of the Scots Guard, and he was court-martialed and found guilty and reprimanded, but his punishment was annulled by the general, and probably because his wife's uncle was the prime minister, H.H. Asquith of the Great Britain at the time. So they're like, let's not punish this guy.
It pays to know high-up people.
Exactly. If you know how, he's like, dude, do you know who my uncle is? I can do whatever I want. But yeah, they were really trying to stomp that out. And there was a few in the Christmas of, there was a few more treaties and stuff in the Christmas of 1915. But by that, after that, really it stopped because people got really bitter with the war. And, once you see so many of your friends die, you just kind of really demonize the other side. And that can be really hard to have someone die when you're friends and then be like fraternizing with people, on a truce. So one of the things that was interesting, it said complicated, I read what it says, it talked about the complicated local truces, so sometimes along the front, and agreements not to fire at each other were negotiated by men along the front of the war. And these often began with an agreement not to attack each other at tea or meal and washing times. In some places, tactic agreements became so common that sectors of the front would see few casualties for extended periods of time. This system, Ashworth, the guy who wrote a book about this, argues gave soldiers some control over their conditions of their existence. So if you think about it, what we said earlier is they don't want to shoot people if they're having truces. It's like, hey, it's lunchtime. Let's just chill, And they're like, okay, no. And then the deaths from each other, from the other side, from gunfire or whatever, were very low in some cases. And that kind of reminded me of something that I had heard earlier about men at war. And there was an analysis done by a guy named Brigadier General Samuel Lyman Atwood Marshall, and he was a military analyst in World War II, and he said that in a squad of 10 men, on average, fewer than 3 ever fired their weapon in combat. And he said that a lot of these guys don't want to kill somebody. He said the fear of aggression has been expressed to him so strongly and absorbed by him so deeply and pervadingly, practically his own mother's milk. He talks about a fear of aggression in Americans and in men generally, that it is part of our normal man's emotional makeup. This is the great handicap when he enters combat. It stays his trigger finger, even though he is hardly conscious that it is a restraint upon him. So that guy quoted that figure, that 3 out of 10 men ever fired. That's a disputed figure. Another study said that only 15 to 20% of soldiers fired their weapon, and an even smaller percentage fired to kill. So I think there's one scene in Band of Brothers where he's like, fire, and they're like, and they're just shooting the tree line above, and he's like, what the heck is going on? Because the soldiers don't want to kill anybody. So they're shooting the tree line up above. The U.S. Army obviously had an issue with this because they're like, well, if we're sending 100 men out and only 20% are shooting, that's a very inefficient force, And so, the article that I was reading said that the Army changed its combat training to try to desensitize soldiers to the humanity of the enemy. And then these new trainings apparently in the Korean War made it so that 55% of infantrymen fired their weapons, and then in the Vietnam War it changed to 90 to 95%. And if you think about it, and the reason why I bring this up is because in World War I, these guys were just feet from each other, and they were talking, they were having truces, they were trading and stuff. So that's the whole piece. The whole war itself hinges on you wanting to kill the other side for some reason. So if you're friends with the other side, if you can't dehumanize the other side, then it makes it very difficult to kill other people. And so I thought that was interesting in the context of the story of the Christmas truce and how just war affects men generally.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's also kind of interesting that that was World War I, right? And so these guys from World War I, and that was at the beginning of the war, but once they get through the end of the war, more towards the end of the war, they just kind of get more bitter. And then how many years after that was World War II? And then it was just kind of war after war after war. And I wonder if that just the constant state of world war to a certain extent played into that figure going up of the infantrymen actually firing their weapon, and not only firing but firing to kill.
I wonder if it has to do with the difference, like someone that looks and speaks totally different from you, it's easier to dehumanize them than someone that you can have a conversation with that looks exactly like you do and talks exactly like you do.
Yeah, that's true. And
so maybe at the time it's like, hey, these guys are speaking English to me and I can speak to them. But like when you're in the Korean War and they look different than you and they speak different than you, or you're in Vietnam, it's easier to dehumanize them and just, be a weapon of war.
That's very true. But going back to the story itself, I love that story. I think it just kind of brings back to basic human nature, I think, is to kind of love one another.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to hurt another person, but in self-defense or in times of war and defending your country and the weak, then it's necessary. But I mean, that story, I really like the song.
That
goes to that
song.
story. It's just kind of, it just kind of brings your spirit together to say that in the midst of such darkness, that light can prevail.
Yeah, and like they started with singing Christmas carols, and they just were kind of like, they were brought together in common cause. And they also had similar trees on Easter that, they would said, there's something is more important that's going on right now. Let's take a break. Let's take a pause. Generals didn't like that, but the men were like, we're taking a pause. we're going to do this. So I think it's kind of special.
Yeah, I bet that situation probably led to the soldiers that were there and participated in these kind of situations, and treaties and Christmas or Easter or New Year's. I wonder if when they took that back to their own towns or their own homes years later, that they kind of instilled that same type of tradition into their own families and their own, kind of peace with enemies.
Yeah. Love on earth and peace towards men, right?
Yeah, for sure. That kind of reminded me of just talking about some of the traditions that we have put together as far as like our family and growing up, and some of these, not so much Christmas traditions, but maybe even holiday traditions. And I think a lot of it stems specifically to start off with is from just like that attitude of gratitude, like we talked about, right? For Thanksgiving, we talked about gratitude and its importance and why it's needed. One thing that Jared and I, growing up, that we would always do is, we would always have Thanksgiving dinner together, but we would, at the end of dinner, we would all go around and we would all say what we were thankful for. I think a lot of families do similar traditions like that, but we'd go around and we'd say everything that we're thankful for and that made us happy, and it was a great time for us to connect personally as a family, brothers and
light
sisters.
a candle as we did it.
Yeah, and we'd light a candle as we did it. And then for Christmas, we would do something similar, but we would do what we call like our gifts to Christ, right? We would go around the table and we would all say something that we had planned for that next year. Maybe you could say it's like a New Year's resolution or whatever, but we thought of it as these are our gifts to Christ. This is what we are willing to do to become better next year. And that could be anything from reading the scriptures more, or maybe doing more service and helping people when the opportunity presents itself, or maybe it's taking better care of our physical bodies and in our mind. So it could be anything, but I loved that tradition that we did of going around and saying, this is what I'm thankful for, and then towards Christmas time to say, this is what my contribution to society is going to be. So something that I really liked.
Yeah, I do like that tradition as well, to keep that going. And we also we typically read the Christmas story on Christmas Eve. One tradition that I've always kind of liked, well, I discovered it when I was on a mission to Mexico, where I spent 2 years, and they have a tradition there called Dia de Reyes Magos. They have that in Chile, right?
I'm not sure.
Well, what it is it's also in English it's called the Epiphany Day. It's usually January 6th. And what it's like, they also kind of refer to as a little Christmas, but it's Dia de los Reyes Magos, or the Three Kings. And what it is it's a commemoration of when the three kings came and came to Jesus and presented them with their gifts. And so in some cultures, I think this is more of it's all over the world, but I think it's pretty big in Spain and Latin American culture, but it's also has roots in England and in France, Germany. But what it is that, in some places the kids will put out their shoes with some candies and stuff in them, and the Reyes Magos will come, the Three Kings will come, and they'll put presents in there and by their shoes and stuff. And I think that is such a cool tradition, because I think it focuses a little bit more on Christ and that story than Santa does. I think sometimes with Santa, it kind of gets a little bit away from the story of Christ, and it can get, when you're talking about reindeer, the North Pole, and flying reindeer, and like elves and all this kind of stuff, that has nothing to do with Christ at all. But when we talk about the Three Kings and how they brought gifts to Christ, I feel like that's a little more understandable and a little translatable to a Christmas. Also, there's a couple more traditions that go with that. there is on the day of January 16th, or excuse me, January 6th, which is the Three Kings Day, they usually do a cake. It's called a roscón de reyes. It's like a circular cake, and it's and you can cut into it, and they hide a little baby Jesus figure. It's like a little plastic baby Jesus. They hide it in the cake somewhere, and it's actually to represent Christ being hidden as the flight of the Holy Family fleeing King Herod's massacre of the innocents. So it's kind of a cool symbolism there that Christ was being hidden as they fled that area, and all those other kids were died. And so then there's some fun traditions where, if you cut into the cake and you get the piece that has the baby Jesus in it, then on February 2nd, which is another day where, Christ was presented at the temple. The different traditions had different things where they say, you have to have everybody over to your house for a party, and you have to make all the atole and all the tamales, which are labor intensive. And so it's kind of like your turn to do the party. But also it could mean, that you're the one that has to take the baby Jesus to church and kind of present Christ to the temple as a symbol.
That's interesting. At work several years ago, there was a guy that brought in a cake around that time, and we all had it, and it had a little baby in it, and I didn't completely understand what that was, but it's just like, oh, okay, yeah, now I get it, and it was like a big deal of who got the baby, and I didn't, but
it's kind
of cool tradition.
Yeah, and I didn't actually know about the whole symbolism behind the flight of the family during the massacre of the innocents, but I think that's a cool little symbolism there. And so I don't particularly do that with my family. My kids are still really little, but I think that is a cool tradition. And in my family, we kind of minimize the focus on Santa as much as possible. In my family, we just do Santa just brings us stockings, and that's it. And really, we don't talk about Santa hardly at all. I mean, the thing is, it's hard to really make a hard shift away from it because all their friends and everybody is really focused on Santa. So we were like, okay, we can't just be like, we only do this. I mean, we could, but I don't want to be such a stickler about it. So we say, yeah, Santa comes and he'll give you your stockings, but really the focus is on Christmas. And when we decorate the tree together, we talk about the star and what the star means. We talk about what the Christmas tree lights mean, and there's lights because Christ is the light of the world, and that's why we have these lights, and that's why. What are these for? What does this represent? What does the tree represent? So that's kind of a family tradition of ours.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting. One thing that we have small kids too, and so we're trying to form these traditions in our family. And one thing that my wife does is that typically around the Christmas time, we try to invite a family over to our house that maybe doesn't have any relatives locally, or that they're going to be spending Christmas not alone because they're together, but maybe away from the rest of their family. We try to invite them over and have a dinner and just befriend somebody. When I was on my mission, there was a guy that was just an awesome guy, and we really loved being around him because he was just kind of that guy that did anything for service. But he had kids that were a little bit older, but one of the things that he would do on Christmas Eve night is that they would make a whole dinner of a whole Christmas dinner, and then they would package it all up after they spent the day making this dinner. They would package it all up, and they would get in the car, and they would drive around town until they found someone who was homeless or in need. Typically in the town that they were in, it wasn't that hard, and especially there was groups of people that kind of congregated together that did not have homes or that were homeless. So basically, they would come, they would sit down with these people that were less fortunate, and they would actually like eat with them. I mean, he would bring he'd bring like a table and paper plates and cups and drinks and I mean everything. I mean, they would literally they would feed as many people as they possibly could. And they would, and more than just like giving a bag and leaving, it was they would sit down with them, they would talk with them, they would just talk about life and growth and how they're feeling and how they're doing. And it was just a good example to me. Not that I'm going to do that specific service, but for him and his family in that area, it worked really well.
Well, if you think about that area, there's not a lot of public services where those people, like, it's not like there's not in the United States, we're blessed that a lot of times there are lots of homes and lots of churches that reach out to a lot of these people, especially during the Christmas season. And there are places where they can go and get a meal. Our tax money goes to pay for a lot of these places. But in places like Chile, you're on your own, man. And if the government doesn't care about you.
Yeah. And another thing to note too, it's interesting, in Chile, it's on the southern hemisphere, so it's the middle of the summer during Christmas. So Christmas is the middle of the summer. And so it's kind of interesting because it's really hot and it's like, everybody's outside.
Yeah.
Versus
crazy.
cold here and everybody's kind of staying inside around the fire. But yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah, that is weird. But good story, very, very good story of service. And I think the message here, what we want to share is that Christmas is a time of hope and a time of charity and giving. And so whether that's working those attributes into a part of your tradition, I would encourage you to do that and try to find someone that needs that love and charity this Christmas season. And also I would encourage you to try to focus on the true meaning of Christmas. And sometimes all the consumerism, all the gifts, all the nonsense gets in the way, but maybe take a pause with your children and talk about what Christmas truly means and the gift that was given to us and how important and special that actually was.
Yeah, I think that plays right into building a personal creed. Who do you want to be? Not only during the Christmas or holiday season, but how will this translate to how you treat other people throughout the rest of the year, throughout the rest of your life? And I really think that we can instill some of these practices of service and love and hope into our own personal creed to continue to develop and grow stronger together.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, that's what, these traditions that you're building, that's the legacy that you're giving for your family. Like let's just say you start a tradition and you're like, this is what we do in our family. We talk about Christ, our gifts to Christ on Christmas Eve when we have dinner. And that is something that you pass down as a tradition, and then your kids will do that with their families. And it's like you're passing on your creed to your kids via a tradition. So I think that's just so important that those traditions are basically habits of your beliefs that you can pass down. And some of them have nostalgia, and some of them, are fun, and some of them, but they can have meaning at the same time.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, this has been great.
Yes.
I think this one was a great one. So, for those of you listening, we appreciate your time and please leave a comment, leave a rating.
Let us know what your Christmas traditions are.
Yeah, for sure. We'll be posting some things on Instagram as well. You can follow us at a.brothers.creed. And we'll be posting some about maybe these traditions and other cool things about the Christmas season.
So have a very Merry Christmas, and let's build that creed together.
All right, let's do it.